Good morning. My name is Martin Lemoine, and I'm the head of Agribusiness at the Asian Development Bank, ADB. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the role of the Asian Development Bank in the agribusiness sector. Let me start by talking about the vulnerabilities of the agri-food system in Asia. First, Asia is dominated by smallholder farmers. The 400 million small farmers in Asia represent 80% of the world's total. This is an issue because it means that land size is subscale. 0.5 hectares only per farmer on average. As a result, farmers are often trapped in poverty or low income levels. It also makes supply chains fragmented and inefficient, since sourcing from so many farmers is a real operational challenge. Second, despite having so many farmers, Asia cannot feed itself, and it's still dependent on imports from the rest of the world, particularly for grains. While global trade for commodities is working rather well, the COVID-19 crisis has further highlighted the risk of import dependency for food security in many countries. Third, the large number of farmers in Asia means there is a huge pressure on land. This is visible on two fronts. Deforestation, particularly in Southeast Asia, as shown on this map. Second, the excessive use of basic fertilizers in countries like China and India have degraded the arable soil quality. The fourth vulnerability is water. 80% of Asia's fresh water is consumed by irrigation. This map again shows that the high number of farmers in India and China, where rainwater is not sufficient, is creating water stress, which often means that the level of groundwater is going down dangerously. There is an urgent need for more efficient and sustainable water use in these areas. The fifth vulnerability is climate change. Agriculture in Asia is particularly exposed to climate change risks, including more irregular rainfalls and more frequent typhoons in Southeast Asia, longer winter drought in places like Nepal, or risk of extreme flooding in countries like Bangladesh. While the global imperative is to mitigate climate change, Asian farmers have no choice but to adapt to climate change immediately. The COVID-19 crisis dramatically came on top of all pre-existing vulnerabilities. It created a supply shock and a demand shock on the agri-food system. On the supply side, supply chain disruption and lockdowns, factory closures, and labor shortage were observed. On the demand side, restaurants closed down and reduced income also meant a reduced budget for many food items. COVID-19 has also halted the secular decline in poverty. In 2020, ADB estimated that 162 million poor and 78 million extreme poor had been added in Asia. These numbers are certainly going up with the prolonged crisis, especially for farmers who are not always reached by government support programs. The supply side shock has impacted food prices. In 2020, global food prices increased for 9 consecutive months to reach their highest level since July 2014. The situation is particularly acute in some vulnerable countries like Bhutan and Myanmar, as you can see from this map. The combination of lower income and higher food prices is increasing food insecurity. As of February 2021, more than half of the population is not eating enough in countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan. And 15 more Asian countries on this chart have levels of food insecurity around 20 to 30%, corresponding to overall 500 million people, including many children who just don't eat enough. But food security is not only about absolute amount of calories. Reduced income have also meant that poor households have cut their consumption of the more nutritive food, such as proteins and fibers, as shown by this study conducted on vegetable farmers in India. This brings us to the final and most insidious vulnerability of the agri-food system, health risks. It is now well documented that developing countries are facing a double burden of persistent malnutrition on one side and growing obesity on the other side, which is driven by the growing middle class and the changes to Western lifestyle, including a growing consumption of ultra-processed food and drinks, as shown on this chart. 40% of adults are obese or overweight in Asia. But COVID-19 has taught us that health risks are multifaceted. COVID-19 is most certainly a zoonosis, meaning a disease that jumped from animals to humans. Zoonoses are closely linked to the agri-food system. While most zoonoses originate from the wildlife, the vector of contamination to humans is typically a farm or a domestic animal. This map, which by the way was prepared in 2017, shows areas where the risk of zoonosis is the highest because of the pressure that human activities are putting on the wildlife. Not surprisingly, India and China were identified as high-risk areas. Another often misunderstood health risk associated with the agri-food system is the growing Anti-Microbial Resistance, or AMR. What is AMR? AMR occurs when microbes, including bacteria, change over time and no longer respond to medicines, including antibiotics, making infections harder to treat. The issue is that antibiotics are widely used in livestock farming to promote growth and prevent infections, so even when animals are not so sick. The issue is particularly acute in Asia, where livestock farmers use a lot of antibiotics, given the lower levels of biosecurity and hygiene of their farms. According to the WHO, drug-resistant disease could cause 10 million deaths each year by 2050. So there is an urgent need for action here as well. To summarize, the agri-food system is facing a triple problem of having to ensure health, livelihoods, and environmental outcomes at the same time. Conflicts between these objectives require policy trade-offs, but synergies can also be explored to achieve multiple goals at the same time. The farmer poet Wendell Berry once said that a good solution solves more than one problem, and it doesn't make new problems. So governments and the private sector alike should target a quadruple bottom line, including economic returns, of course, but also social, environmental, and health outcomes. Against this backdrop, a global dynamic to change the agri-food system has been launched. 2015 saw two critical landmarks with the adoption of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. In 2016, the Lancet report was another milestone which added the health dimension to the food system conundrum. The Lancet report is the first full scientific review of what constitutes a healthy diet from a sustainable food system. This global dynamic culminated in the UN Food Systems Summit in New York City last month. Global public and private stakeholders have committed to concrete actions to improve the agri-food system. Another way to express the urgency of action is to compute the hidden costs or negative externalities of the food system. The health, environmental, and economic costs amount to almost $12 trillion a year, which is surprisingly even more than the market value of the food system, which is about $10 trillion. But thankfully, there are clear business opportunities associated with the transition. For example, organic farming is a $770 billion opportunity. Sustainable aquaculture is a $255 billion opportunity. Forest restoration, a $170 billion opportunity. And high-tech agriculture, a $110 billion opportunity at least. To reap the benefits of these changes, however, a massive amount of additional investments is required, at least $350 billion every year until 2030. The reason of these massive investments needs is that the agri-food sector is essentially underinvested. The investment rate of the sector is at 5%. That is 2 to 3 times less than what observed for other sectors. We all take food and farmers for granted because they have been around forever. But the chronic lack of investment in the sector has the consequences that we now observe. Given the huge amount of investments required, private sector finance is a key part of the answer. In Asia, which is about 65% of the world's middle class by 2030, investments in the sector will need to increase from $130 billion to $290 billion by 2030. It is estimated that only 2% of this will come from governments, 11% from companies themselves, and 88% from the financial sector. To unlock private sector funds to the sector, new financing models are required. One is impact investing, where investors are deliberately targeting impact. Supply chain financing is another way to increase funding into the sector by leveraging the interdependency of players along the value chain. Sustainability-linked debt is another promising area, where banks reward companies that achieve preset sustainability targets with lower interest rates. Finally, incubators and accelerators are required to attract more venture capital funding to the sector. As I will explain in the next section, ADB is actively promoting these new business models. ADB provides assistance to the agri-food system in 3 ways. Sovereign assistance to governments of close to $2 billion a year. Non-sovereign assistance to the private sector of close to $2 billion a year as well, when including the amounts of guarantees provided as part of our trade finance, supply chain finance, and microfinance programs. And last but not least, knowledge services to maximize impact beyond ADB's direct investing. ADB's private sector operation impact the agri-food systems both directly with assistance to agribusinesses, but also indirectly through funding and guarantees provided to banks, private equity funds, and other financial intermediaries. We recently launched our own VC fund, ADB Ventures, which will invest in agtech among other sectors. Our direct agribusiness portfolio has grown a lot in recent years. We do about 5 agribusiness transactions a year for around $150 to $200 million. The portfolio size is now about $500 million, with 18 clients in 14 countries. We support the entire value chain from seeds to supermarkets, so including agricultural inputs, farming itself, processing, trading, marketing, and distribution. ADB's COVID-19 response is particularly important for the sector since farmers and agribusinesses alike have faced severe liquidity issues. While our traditional products are long-term loans to finance capital expenditures, we had to switch gear in 2020 and provide for the first time 2 to 3 year working capital loans to ensure essential food supply in impacted countries and sustained livelihoods for around 400,000 smallholder farmers. Going forward, our agribusiness strategy is to diversify our portfolio to new sectors such as sustainable agriculture, plant-based proteins, and forestry, but also high efficiency agricultural inputs and equipment, and modern and online retail to maximize our impact. We need to do even more in poor and frontier markets, such as the Pacific Islands and the small landlocked countries like Laos, Nepal, Mongolia, and in Central Asia. Our strategy is also to diversify the portfolio to new clients, both large and small, and new instruments, such as sustainability bonds and blended finance. We manage close to $1 billion of blended finance funds that donors asked us to allocate to projects supporting climate change mitigation and adaptation, inclusive business, and gender equality. The end goal of our agribusiness strategy is obviously to contribute to the SDGs. Our projects have a direct impact on at least 12 of the 17 SDGs. For example, our projects have enhanced the livelihoods of 500,000 contract farmers and their families. They have created 100,000 direct jobs, including 50% for women. They have reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 500,000 tons of CO2 equivalent and made 50,000 hectares of agricultural land more climate resilient. Let me now go through a few case studies. Olam is an example of a large multinational company we work with to achieve an impact on a large number of farmers in multiple countries, including frontier markets. We have provided 2 loans to Olam so far, as well as technical assistance to train 20,000 of their contract farmers. New Hope is a different case, as while the company is expanding internationally, it is still very Chinese, which means that ADB can also help the company become more transparent and international. We provided a loan to support biosecurity in their pig farming business in China against the backdrop of the African swine fever. And we just signed another loan to provide liquidity for their animal feed subsidiaries and farmer clients in 8 countries of South and Southeast Asia. In India, poultry processor Suguna was hit hard by false rumors that chickens were carriers of COVID-19, resulting in a 40% reduction in sales compared to pre-pandemic levels. ADB provided a loan to help Suguna sustain its operations. While the company recoups, ADB is helping Suguna to manage inventory buffers and to make timely payments to contract farmers and suppliers, thereby minimizing disruption to farmers' incomes and ensuring continued poultry supply. Lockdowns and business closures have disrupted the milk collection process in Bangladesh. Farmers are forced to sell their milk intermittently at low prices or let raw milk spoil, which would reduce their income significantly. ADB's support to Pran Dairy in Bangladesh has helped the company surmount this obstacle by continuously procuring milk from a network of 12,000 farmers and adding 1,200 farmers to its procurement network. This was our 3rd loan to Pran since 2012, an example of the importance of a long-term relationship and repeat business. COVID-19 spurred rises in food and wheat prices in Mongolia due to higher transport costs stemming from lockdowns as well as export restrictions. Meeting staple demand is, however, crucial to maintain food security during this crisis. ADB provided support to Tavangbogd, Mongolia's leading wheat miller, which supplies over 1/3 of the country's wheat flour. Tavangbogd increased its procurement of domestic wheat and built enough buffer inventory to cope with supply chain disruptions, just in time for the annual wheat harvest procurement season in the last quarter of 2020. The Haas Farm case study is an example of support to high-tech agriculture, with investments in modern climate-controlled greenhouses for the production of flowers and vegetables. What was unique in this financing as well is that the technology and the business, once successfully developed in Vietnam, were then deployed to China and Indonesia. So a good example of regional integration and technology spillover through trade and foreign direct investment. ADB provided a $20 million loan to the company in 2017. Finally, the mountain hazelnut case study in Bhutan is an example of what can be achieved through ADB technical assistance, in addition to ADB investment. In 2015, ADB invested $3 million in a company promoting distributed hazelnut production on small farmers' barren land. At the same time, ADB mobilized $1.5 million in technical assistance to provide climate-smart agriculture and financial literacy trainings to 15,000 of these farmers. This will ensure that the contract farmers maximize the benefit that they will get from their trees when they reach production. Thank you so much for your attention. On this page, I have provided links to further readings related to the material that I have presented today. Please do feel free to reach out to me for any questions, and I hope you have a successful event today. Thank you very much.